I thought it would be cool if I talked a little bit today about hypodermic needle theory and what it means, whether it's still relevant, and how I think it's changed in the past 30, 40 years, at least in the realm of news media, as well as the activity of audiences and how active or passive they are, and how that's changed over time. Hypodermic needle theory is essentially the communication theory that explains why propaganda works as a medium to convince people what to think and what to do. There are some pretty significant differences between hypodermic needle theory and other theories in how audiences ingest information and whether they actually believe it or whether they question it. So since this theory was developed in the 20s and 30s, people had a really different perspective of film and TV, especially because those mediums were very new, people were very wowed by it, and only a very select population had access to the ability to make this kind of media. So people who had access to cameras, lights, all of the sound equipment, because sound was new at that time, it was expensive and you needed a lot of funding to be able to do it, and not only do it, but get it out for people to see. The other thing about hypodermic needle theory is that it assumes that the audience that is consuming the media that's made is completely passive. They are going to agree and take on whatever is being told to them. And I remember when I learned about this theory when I was a freshman in college, I could not believe that someone would ingest media and just immediately believe it. But thinking back, we have examples that were massive shocks to the world or huge propaganda campaigns that kind of prove otherwise, at least for the period. I think looking at things like Nazi propaganda and Hollywood propaganda in the 30s and 40s, think about how the patriotism of something, even a classic film like Casablanca, is essentially a war propaganda film. And that doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make it, anything. I don't think propaganda is always necessarily bad. I think propaganda can be a tool that's used for good if used wisely. But we have a very negative connotation around it because of people like Nazis. Another example is I believe it was the 60s, there was a big game show scandal because at the time, everyone believed that these game shows that were kind of new on TV, they were like quiz shows, knowledge-based game shows. People thought that they were all legitimate, that people who were going on and winning actually knew all the answers to these questions, or they didn't have any warning or preparation for the show. But there was a scandal in which the studio really, really wanted this one particular person to win, and so they pushed for that, and it ended up being a massive scandal when the public found out that the person who won was not necessarily the most knowledgeable person on the panel. And things like that really caused a big a shake in the trust of who was actually delivering our news to us, which is why we saw such a huge difference in behavior from the Cold War and the Korean Wars versus the Vietnam War, and how not only the media displayed that war, but also how people were treated when they returned from that war. And I even mentioned that war actually in my last video, in which I was discussing trauma and how the mental health field hadn't prepared for people coming back from the wars with such trauma. They were diagnosing them as schizophrenics originally because they didn't even know what PTSD was. It didn't exist as a diagnosis yet. But essentially, hypodermic needle theory has mostly died out due to a different teaching style. And this is kind of my thought process. I'm not going based off of any official theory or thought process that someone else has told me here. This is just my thought process. I think the reason that most people no longer ingest news and wholly agree with it or accept it as truth is because of things like how people were feeling betrayed by the game show scandal, or how people were more aware that propaganda is real and constantly floods our timelines now. But it does exist for, I think, older populations, and I think that the reason that you have a difference in education in let's say Gen Xers or boomers versus millennials and Gen Z aged people. You have older people who were mostly taught very lecture style in their earlier education, so elementary school through high school, at least in the United States. And then some people were taught critical thinking differently than others, so you had some people not really necessarily learning critical thinking in the same way that we do now through college or high school, and they might have learned that the hard way from like real life experiences instead of in the classroom. Personally, I'm Gen Z, and I was taught critical thinking very directly in my English classes in high school. We learned about satire, we learned about discerning what's true, we learned about things like logical fallacies, and we learned how to argue. We had Socratic seminars every week in which we would discuss our readings and all these things, and I feel like it really changed how I view communication and news production, because I learned that everyone who's saying anything has a greater purpose. They have an ulterior motive to what they're saying to you. And that's true for any media, whether it's narrative, news, documentary, anything. I like to joke about how documentaries are like the TMZ of filmmaking, because a lot of the time it's bullshit. I think a lot of people who are into documentaries have seen documentaries and thought to themselves, I don't know about that, because in the end there is a director. There's a director for a news show, there's a director for a documentary. There's always an ulterior motive, there's always something that someone is trying to tell you, whether it's upfront or like something they want for you to ingest passively, like how the hypodermic needle theory suggests. I think it's pretty fascinating how we see it in news now. I took a college class freshman year, and we discussed how each of the people in the class ingested their news. And some people were saying things like Twitter, YouTube, things that have algorithms, things that shape what you see based on what you like, what you interact with. So if you are very, very right-leaning, you're going to get more and more right-leaning media on your page. And I remember there was a girl who was in my class who was really smart, and she said, yeah, I don't go based on Twitter, I just download all of the apps. Like, she had the CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and Washington Post, or like all these different like apps on her phone, and she would just go based on the notifications that she would get. And I thought that was really smart. It was really well-rounded, because you're gonna have different perspectives of the same news events when you have such an array like to choose from for media sources. And like something that's been at the forefront of conversation about the algorithms on YouTube lately has been the right-wing like rabbit hole that you can fall down when you actually get into YouTube, especially when it's micro content like YouTube Shorts, because you're ingesting such a wide variety of content in such a short amount of time, and you can easily like let's say one Andrew Tate video, and then your feed's going to be filled with them because they know that you like that particular character, that persona, and so they're going to give you more things that are similar to it. And so it's really easy for people to become extreme. And I think that fostering a Socratic learning environment in high schools and even junior highs and elementary school, I think that would really curb a lot of the extremism that we see, because people will be thinking, asking more questions, questioning what they're seeing, not really feeling like they have to agree with what they're reading. And I think, I read Voltaire in high school, and I think that was one of the best reading choices that we had, because it taught us to read something and think about the context with which it was written and who it's really about and what it's really telling you and why it's funny. And I think that satire should be part of more English programs. I think a lot of the time, because there is a misunderstanding of what satire is, like in the modern world, a lot of people try to say that something is satire and they are very, very distinctly misdefining it. And I think that's unfortunate. I do still have my copy of Candide. It is a prized possession. I love this book. I think it's hilarious, and like, I just flipped open to this page, it just says criticism. I think that's great. I think that that's part of the reason I think there's such a huge cultural shift as well between Gen Xers and millennials. And I think that that's why millennials, of course, get blamed for everything, is because they were the first people who, well, I don't even want to say that that's historically true. I'm actually questioning myself now, because I don't want to say that, like, my parents who are Gen Xers weren't raised with Socratic, like, any Socratic method, but I do think that there was a certain level of, my teacher's my teacher and they're telling me the truth and I'm going to listen to them and they know everything. And I think millennials were kind of an age group raised by boomers where they just started to question their teachers more. I've had multiple classes, even in high school, where I approached the teacher and I said, hey, I want to learn about this specific thing. Can I cater my curriculum to this? And not everybody's going to have the opportunity to do that. I had some really fantastic teachers that let me do what I wanted to do and make my own curriculum. I did it for 2 classes my senior year. My English class, I said, hey, I want to read a whole bunch of banned books that aren't on your reading list. Can I do that? And she said, sure, as long as they're going to challenge you enough and they're not going to be easy reads. And I was like, absolutely. I ended up reading crazy stuff like A Clockwork Orange and Lolita. And it was a great challenge for me. I had a really great experience making my own curriculum and challenging myself and doing something that I thought was going to be fun and educational. And it was a great choice for teachers because I wanted to learn. And I'd already read a lot of the stuff that was on the reading list from other classes, and there was so much Shakespeare. I like Shakespeare, but I think I read like 10 or 12 Shakespeare plays when I was in high school, which is a little bit ridiculous, I'm not gonna lie. I wanted to read something else. I was like, I love Mary Shelley. I've read Mary Shelley. Can I please read something else? And they let me do it because I asked nicely and because I put the work into it. And I think that somebody in my parents' generation would never have been allowed to do that. No, taking control of your own education and like wanting to learn for the sake of learning instead of wanting to just get through this class. But I think the Socratic teaching method can sometimes be a little bit of a brain fuck, and I think that when teachers do it, they should be upfront about it. I think that they should say, we're doing the Socratic teaching method in this class because it's not going to work for everybody. Like, asking questions all the time, it's kind of like the reason I don't want to do directing in the film industry is because a lot of it is just kind of like messing with your actor's brain to get them to do what you want. And I don't always like manipulating people that way. I'd rather be upfront and be like, well, I believe this about whatever it is. So I'm not a mind games type of person, so I'm going the producing route in my industry. But I think when teachers do the Socratic method, it should either be fully Socratic all the time for all of the teaching for all 5 days of the week or however often the class is being taught, or you do regular lecture during the week and then like once a week for the full class period, you do a Socratic seminar. So you like pull out the books, you have people start asking questions, you have a leader, which would probably be the teacher or if someone volunteered, and they would be asking questions, stimulating the conversation for the class. And I think that that was something that we also did because we kind of worked up to the Socratic like method throughout my high school years. My first 2 years we did seminars, my second 2 years we did mostly Socratic. And I think that is why a lot of people can be really intellectually intimidating to older people, is because they were taught how to talk to older people in an intellectual setting. So I can sit down and talk to my parents and match them on their conversation skills, even though I'm significantly younger than them, because I was taught how to. And I think we should teach people how to. I think it, honestly, in the end, it's gonna like keep people from being violent. like people who get upset and get angry, teaching them at an early age how to have mature and intellectual discussions about what they believe in is going to keep people from being violent. It's going to keep people, and it's going to change more minds. Like, getting angry at someone and insulting someone isn't going to change their mind. It's going to do nothing. It's going to alienate them and make them double down in their beliefs. but asking questions and understanding them and seeing what they really care for, like investigating their values, is going to be way more significant in their life and in that discussion than insulting someone and making them double down. So I think that it's something that's a shift. I mean, obviously not every millennial and not every Gen Z was like privileged enough to have that kind of upbringing. But I think that as the school system develops and changes and more teachers are inspired to teach kids like in this method, I think that it will continue to grow over time, and people are going to be better talkers, they're going to be better thinkers, and we won't have to worry about people watching the news and just ingesting everything as truth. We should be questioning, we should be asking, and questioning is not disrespect. That's another thing. The reason that boomers hate millennials so much, so overtly in the news, they're constantly complaining about them, is because they think that questioning is disrespect. And we need to let go of that completely. Asking questions is respectful. And once we get a grasp on that societally, I think that we're gonna do really, really well. I think that like this culture clash between like learning styles and media interpretation is the reason that we have this wide polarization right now. And once we can get through to younger people as we age up, that asking questions is good, challenging ourselves is good, understanding other people is good, we're gonna do fine.